Rain fell heavily over Colony 47, covering the giant space colony in cold gray shadows. Water dripped from broken pipes above the crowded market streets, while humans and aliens pushed past each other without speaking. Nobody trusted anyone anymore. The long war between humans and alien races had ended years ago, but the fear never truly disappeared. Small security drones floated above the streets, watching every movement carefully. Ethan Cole stood behind his small food stall near the station gate, serving hot soup and old bread to tired workers trying to survive another hard day. Ethan's life had become simple after leaving the cargo fleet years ago. He no longer cared about politics, soldiers, or the hatred between species. He only wanted peace. Most people ignored him because he stayed quiet and never caused trouble. As steam rose from the soup containers, Ethan noticed movement near the edge of the market. A small alien child stood half-hidden behind an old metal machine. The boy looked thin and weak, with pale blue skin and silver eyes filled with fear. His torn clothes hung loosely from his body like he had not eaten properly in many days. The child kept staring at the bread sitting on Ethan's counter. Every few seconds, he nervously looked around the crowded market as if expecting someone to attack him. When a group of humans walked too close, the boy quickly stepped backward and lowered his head. Ethan noticed the child's hands shaking badly. He had seen hungry people before, but this was different. The boy looked terrified of humans themselves. His eyes carried the kind of fear that came from painful memories. Ethan quietly watched him while pretending to clean the counter. Suddenly, the alien child rushed forward, grabbed a loaf of bread, and ran into the crowded street. Several people immediately began shouting. One large man wearing mining gear angrily pointed toward the child and yelled, "Dirty little thief!" The crowd quickly turned hostile. Some laughed while others cursed at the terrified boy. The child slipped on the wet metal ground and crashed hard against a wall near the alley entrance. Before he could stand again, the angry miner raised a heavy metal pipe, ready to strike him in front of everyone. But the hit never came. Ethan quickly stepped between them and grabbed the man's arm before the pipe could fall. The market suddenly became silent. The miner glared at Ethan with anger. "Move aside," the man growled. "That alien stole from you." Ethan calmly looked at the frightened child lying on the ground. The boy covered his head with both arms, waiting for pain like he had experienced this many times before. Ethan slowly shook his head. "It's just bread," he said quietly. "Leave him alone." The miner cursed under his breath before walking away with the rest of the angry crowd. For several seconds, the alien child did not move. Then he slowly looked up at Ethan with confusion and fear mixed together. It was almost as if kindness itself frightened him more than violence. Ethan carefully picked up the loaf of bread and placed it beside the boy. "Take it," he said softly. The child stared at him with wide silver eyes. His breathing became fast and nervous. Then, in a weak, shaking voice, the boy whispered, "Please, don't follow me." Without another word, he grabbed the bread and disappeared into the dark lower streets of Colony 47. Ethan watched him vanish into the shadows, but something caught his attention before the child disappeared completely. There was blood on the boy's sleeve. Fresh blood. A large amount of it. Ethan frowned deeply as questions filled his mind. The child did not look injured badly enough to bleed like that, which meant the blood probably belonged to someone else. That night, Ethan could not sleep properly inside his small apartment above the market. Every time he closed his eyes, he remembered the fear inside the child's face and the way he begged not to be followed. The next morning, Ethan returned to his stall before sunrise. The streets were quieter than usual, covered in cold fog from the lower factories. As he prepared the soup containers, he noticed the same alien child searching through old trash bins nearby. The boy looked even weaker now. His movements were slower, and dark circles rested under his frightened eyes. Ethan quietly packed bread, medicine, and clean water into a small bag. Then, without speaking, he slowly followed the child as he disappeared once again into the dangerous lower levels of the colony. The alien boy kept looking behind him every few moments while moving through narrow tunnels filled with broken wires and steam pipes. The deeper they traveled, the darker the colony became. Even the security drones refused to enter these forgotten lower sectors. Finally, the child stopped outside an old ruined apartment hidden behind rusted metal doors. Ethan carefully stepped closer and looked inside the dark room. And then he froze. A weak alien woman lay chained to the floor beside a broken bed. Her skin looked pale from sickness, and her breathing sounded slow and painful. Old human military chains locked tightly around her wrists. The child quickly stood in front of her protectively. And for the first time, Ethan realized something terrible. The boy was not hiding from monsters. He was hiding from humans. The room smelled of rust, sickness, and damp metal. Water dripped slowly from the ceiling while weak yellow lights flickered above the ruined apartment. Ethan stood silently near the doorway, shocked by what he was seeing. The alien woman lying on the floor looked terribly weak. Her breathing was uneven and heavy metal chains locked around both of her wrists. Old bruises covered her pale blue skin. Beside her, the small alien child stared at Ethan with fear burning inside his silver eyes. The boy held a broken metal pipe tightly in his shaking hands, trying to protect his mother, despite looking exhausted himself. "Please leave," the child whispered nervously. "Please don't call the soldiers." Ethan slowly raised both hands to show he meant no harm. He carefully placed the food and medicine bag onto the dusty floor before stepping backward slightly. The alien woman weakly opened her eyes after hearing their voices. Her tired gaze immediately locked onto Ethan. Fear crossed her face the moment she realized a human stood inside the apartment. She tried pulling herself backward, but the heavy chains stopped her movement. Pain filled her expression as the metal tightened around her wrists. The small boy quickly knelt beside her, gently holding her shoulders while trying to calm her down. "It's all right, Mother," he whispered softly. "He didn't hurt me." The woman's breathing remained shaky as she studied Ethan carefully. Years of fear and suffering were visible inside her tired eyes. Ethan looked around the ruined apartment and realized how badly they had been surviving. Empty food cans covered the corners of the room. Thin blankets rested beside broken machines that no longer worked. Cold air entered through large cracks in the walls. Nobody could survive long in conditions like this. Ethan slowly looked back at the chains around the woman's wrists. They carried the symbol of the old human military government from the war years. "Who did this to you?" Ethan quietly asked. The woman lowered her eyes without answering. The child suddenly stepped in front of her again. "Humans did," he said angrily. His weak voice shook with emotion. "Humans always hurt us." Those words hit Ethan harder than he expected. The boy could not have been older than 10 years, yet his eyes carried deep hatred and fear toward humanity. Ethan had seen many terrible things during the war years while working as a cargo pilot, but hearing such pain from a child felt different. He slowly opened the medicine bag and carefully removed small medical supplies. "Your mother needs treatment," he said calmly. "If her fever gets worse, she may not survive the week." The child immediately became defensive again. "Why would you help us?" he demanded. "Humans hate our kind." Ethan remained silent for several seconds because, honestly, he did not fully know the answer himself. Maybe he was tired of watching innocent people suffer. Maybe he simply could not ignore the fear inside the child's eyes. Finally, he quietly replied, "Not all humans are the same." The apartment became silent except for the sound of dripping water. After a long moment, the alien woman weakly nodded toward the child. "Kale," she whispered softly. "Let him help." The boy looked uncertain, but slowly stepped aside. Ethan carefully approached and examined the woman's condition. Her fever was dangerously high, and several deep wounds covered her arms beneath the chains. Some looked old, while others were recent. Ethan realized someone had hurt her not long ago. As he cleaned the wounds carefully, the woman winced painfully but never cried out. Kale watched every movement nervously from nearby. His silver eyes never left Ethan's hands. The child clearly expected betrayal at any second. Ethan finally noticed strange burn marks across the woman's neck and shoulders. They did not look natural. They looked like injuries caused by experiments or machines. Before Ethan could ask about them, A loud metallic sound suddenly echoed somewhere outside the apartment. Kyle instantly froze in fear. "They're here," the child whispered. The woman's face turned pale. "No, not again." Ethan quickly moved toward the cracked window and carefully looked outside into the dark lower streets. Several armed security officers wearing black armor were searching nearby apartments with flashlights. Large drones floated above them while scanners beeped through the tunnels. Ethan's heart immediately tightened. These were not normal colony police. They belonged to Internal Security Division, dangerous people who handled war fugitives and classified operations. One officer suddenly spoke through a radio device. "Search every room. The alien woman and the child must still be here." Cale backed away in terror while holding his mother tightly. The woman closed her eyes hopelessly, as if she already knew escape was impossible. Ethan looked between the frightened family and the soldiers moving closer outside. He knew helping them could destroy his life forever. But when he looked at the terrified child shaking beside his dying mother, he made his decision. Ethan quietly turned off the apartment lights. Then he looked directly at Cale. "Stay silent," he whispered. Heavy footsteps slowly approached the apartment door. The heavy footsteps outside slowly disappeared into the dark tunnels of Colony 47, but the fear inside the apartment remained. Kyle stayed close beside his mother, while his silver eyes remained fixed on the doorway. The weak lights above flickered constantly, covering the ruined room in moving shadows. Ethan could hear distant security drones flying through nearby tunnels, while officers shouted orders somewhere deeper in the lower sector. Nobody inside the apartment spoke for several seconds. Even breathing felt dangerous now. The air itself carried tension, fear, and the feeling that something terrible was waiting just outside the door. Ethan carefully looked toward the alien woman still chained beside the broken bed. Her condition looked worse than before. Sweat covered her pale skin, while her breathing became slower and heavier. Cale quickly wrapped an old blanket around her shoulders before looking nervously toward Ethan again. The child clearly wanted to trust him, but years of fear still controlled him. Ethan slowly sat near the rusted wall and opened the small medical bag beside him. As he prepared more medicine for the woman's fever, he quietly asked the question that had been filling his mind since entering the apartment. "Why are they hunting a child?" The room immediately became silent again. Kyle lowered his head while his mother closed her tired eyes painfully. Neither of them answered at first. Ethan noticed the fear on their faces grow even stronger after hearing the question. It was not normal fear anymore. It looked like the fear of people hiding a terrible secret for far too long. Finally, the woman slowly opened her eyes and looked directly toward Ethan. Her weak voice almost disappeared beneath the sound of dripping water falling from broken pipes above them. "Because Cale is not normal," she whispered softly. Ethan frowned slightly after hearing those words. At first he thought she meant the boy was special among his alien species, but something about her expression told him the truth was much darker. Cale immediately pulled his arms closer to his body as if trying to hide something. The woman slowly reached toward the cloth wrapped tightly around the child's wrist. Cale quickly stepped backward in panic. Fear instantly filled his silver eyes again while he shook his head nervously. "No," Kyle whispered quickly. "Please don't show him." The woman looked at him sadly before gently speaking again. "Cale, we cannot hide forever." For several seconds the child remained frozen in place. Then slowly, with shaking hands, he allowed his mother to unwrap the cloth covering part of his arm. Ethan leaned closer carefully. The moment the cloth fell away, his entire expression changed. Strange silver lines glowed faintly beneath Cale's pale blue skin. The marks moved slowly through his arm, like streams of living energy flowing inside his veins. Ethan had seen advanced alien technology before during his cargo fleet days, but nothing looked like this. The glowing patterns almost felt alive. "What is this?" Ethan quietly asked. Cale quickly covered his arm again while looking away in shame. The woman took a slow, painful breath before answering. "During the war, human scientists captured many of our people. Some were soldiers, some were engineers, others became prisoners for experiments." Her voice became weaker with every sentence. Kyle was born inside one of those facilities. Ethan's stomach tightened immediately after hearing that. Old memories returned to him from years ago while transporting military supplies during the war. There had always been rumors about hidden laboratories deep inside restricted sectors. Strange cargo shipments, prisoners disappearing, entire research stations erased from official records. Most people believed those stories were only conspiracy theories created after the war ended. But now Ethan sat inside a ruined apartment staring directly at proof those horrors were real. They experimented on children? Ethan asked quietly. The woman slowly lowered her eyes before giving a weak nod. Cale remained completely silent while staring at the floor beneath him. Ethan suddenly understood why the child feared humans so deeply. Cale had probably spent his entire life running from people who treated him like a weapon instead of a living child. The anger Ethan once carried from the war slowly turned into something else now. Shame, guilt, regret. Humanity had survived the war, but at what cost? We escaped 2 years ago, the woman continued softly, but they never stopped searching for him. Kyle suddenly stood up angrily, his small fists shaking tightly beside his body. "Because they think I'm dangerous," he shouted. His voice echoed loudly across the apartment before quickly fading into silence again. The child's breathing became uneven, while tears slowly formed inside his silver eyes. "I never wanted any of this," he whispered weakly. "I never wanted to hurt anyone." Ethan carefully stepped closer toward him. "What can you do, Cale?" The child hesitated for several seconds before looking toward his mother. Fear crossed her face again, but eventually she gave him a weak nod. Slowly, Kyle lifted one trembling hand toward an old metal cup resting near the corner of the room. At first, nothing happened. Then suddenly the cup began shaking violently across the floor before slowly rising into the air by itself. Ethan froze completely. The metal object floated several feet above the ground without anyone touching it. The glowing marks beneath Cale's skin became brighter while the child struggled to breathe properly. Then suddenly the cup crashed violently against the wall. Kyle immediately grabbed his head in pain and collapsed onto his knees. Blood slowly dripped from his nose onto the dusty floor while his mother rushed toward him in panic. "Enough," she cried weakly. "You must stop before it kills you." Kyle breathed heavily while trying to wipe away the blood with shaking hands. Ethan stared silently at the child, unable to fully process what he had just witnessed. This was far beyond military experiments now. Kyle carried something dangerous inside him, something powerful enough to frighten even the people who created it. Suddenly, a soft beeping sound echoed from somewhere inside the room. Everyone froze instantly. Cale's terrified eyes slowly moved toward his arm. The glowing marks beneath his skin suddenly flashed red beneath the cloth wrapped around them. Ethan quickly grabbed the child's wrist and carefully pulled the cloth away again. Hidden beneath Cale's skin near his elbow was a tiny blinking device buried deep inside the flesh itself. Ethan's heart dropped immediately the moment he understood what it was. A tracker. The alien woman covered her mouth in horror while Cale stepped backward in fear. Outside the apartment, loud security alarms suddenly activated across the lower colony tunnels. Red emergency lights flashed through the dark streets while distant voices shouted new orders through radio devices. Heavy footsteps echoed somewhere nearby again, closer this time, and now Ethan finally understood the terrible truth. They were not searching the colony anymore. They were coming directly for Cale. Red emergency lights flashed through the lower tunnels of Colony 47, while loud alarms echoed across the underground sectors without stopping. The ruined apartment shook slightly each time heavy security doors slammed shut somewhere nearby. Kyle stood frozen beside the wall, staring at the blinking tracker hidden beneath his skin. Fear completely covered his small face now, and his silver eyes looked filled with panic. Beside him, his sick mother struggled to breathe while trying to stand despite the pain in her weak body. Ethan quickly moved toward the cracked window and carefully looked outside into the dark streets below. Armed security officers filled the tunnels. Black armored soldiers moved through the lower streets carrying pulse rifles, while large drones scanned every corner with glowing red lights. Ethan's stomach tightened immediately when he noticed the symbol painted across their armor. Internal Security Division. These were not normal colony police officers anymore. These were the same dangerous people connected to the secret war experiments years ago. Entire tunnel sectors were now being sealed one by one. Whoever commanded this operation clearly wanted Kale badly enough to shut down half the colony just to capture him alive. "We need to leave right now," Ethan whispered quickly while stepping away from the window. Kyle immediately rushed toward his mother while trying to unlock the heavy chains around her wrists. His hands shook badly from fear and exhaustion. The alien woman winced painfully while trying to pull herself free, but the restraints refused to open. "The lock code stopped working," Kyle whispered desperately while fighting back tears. Ethan quickly searched the ruined apartment before finding an old industrial cutter hidden beneath broken machines near the wall. Sparks flew through the dark room as he forced the tool against the thick metal restraints. Outside, heavy footsteps slowly approached the apartment hallway. Then suddenly a loud voice echoed outside the door. "Search every room carefully." Kale's eyes widened in terror while his mother grabbed his arm weakly. Ethan pushed harder against the chains as sweat rolled down his forehead. The cutter finally burned through the last restraint with a loud metallic snap. Broken chains crashed onto the floor while the alien woman nearly collapsed from weakness. Kale quickly caught her before she could fall completely. Ethan immediately pointed toward the backside of the apartment where several old pipes covered part of the wall. "There's a maintenance tunnel behind those pipes," he whispered urgently. "Move now before they break inside." Kale helped his mother toward the hidden opening while Ethan quickly blocked the apartment entrance using broken furniture and rusted machines. Seconds later, the apartment door exploded inward with a violent crash. Armed soldiers stormed into the room with flashlights and rifles raised. Bright beams of light cut through the darkness while officers searched every corner aggressively. But by then Ethan, Kale, and his mother had already escaped into the narrow underground tunnel hidden behind the wall. The maintenance passage was cold, wet, and filled with thick steam leaking from damaged pipes overhead. Water covered the metal floor while old warning lights flickered weakly around them. Kyle stayed close beside his mother while constantly looking behind them in fear. Ethan led them deeper into the abandoned tunnel system beneath Colony 47. Most citizens no longer remembered these tunnels even existed after the war years ended. But Ethan remembered transporting cargo through these underground routes long ago, when he still worked for the fleet. Suddenly, mechanical sounds echoed somewhere behind them. The drones had entered the tunnels. Kale immediately grabbed Ethan's arm nervously while his silver eyes filled with panic again. Bright red scanner lights slowly appeared through the darkness behind them, while flying security drones moved carefully through the narrow corridors. Ethan quickly pushed Kale and his mother behind several large rusted pipes before quietly removing an old plasma cutter from his belt. The first drone floated slowly overhead while scanning the tunnel walls. Ethan waited silently until it moved close enough. Then he suddenly jumped forward and slammed the plasma cutter directly into the machine. Sparks exploded through the dark corridor as the drone crashed violently against the wall. But before Ethan could destroy the second machine, its alarm system activated loudly. "Targets located," the robotic voice announced across the tunnels. Everything immediately became chaos. More footsteps echoed through nearby corridors while soldiers shouted new orders through communication devices. Ethan quickly grabbed Kale's arm and forced him forward through the darkness. The child struggled to help his weak mother keep moving while fear completely controlled his face now. They turned sharply into another tunnel just as pulse rifle fire exploded behind them. Bright blue energy blasts slammed against the metal walls, sending smoke and burning debris flying through the air around them. "They're trying to kill us," Kyle shouted fearfully while running. "No," Ethan replied quickly while pulling them deeper into the tunnels. "They want you alive." Those words terrified Kale even more than the gunfire behind them. After several exhausting minutes of running through the underground corridors, the group finally reached an abandoned transport station hidden deep beneath the colony. Old cargo trains rested silently on rusted tracks, while weak emergency lights flickered overhead. Ethan quickly sealed the station doors behind them before helping Kale's mother sit carefully against the wall. Her skin looked dangerously pale now, and her fever had clearly grown worse after the escape. Every breath sounded painful as she struggled to stay conscious. Kale immediately knelt beside her while tears slowly filled his silver eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered softly while holding her trembling hand. "This is happening because of me." His mother gently touched the side of his face despite her weakness. Sadness filled her tired eyes as she looked at her frightened son. "No, Kale," she whispered weakly. "None of this was ever your fault. You did nothing wrong." Ethan quietly watched them from nearby while trying to think of another escape route. But before he could speak, a new voice suddenly echoed through the dark station behind him. "You always did choose the wrong side, Ethan." Ethan froze immediately after hearing the voice. Slowly, he turned toward the shadows near the station entrance. A tall officer wearing black security armor stepped forward into the weak light above the platform. A long scar crossed the side of his face while cold gray eyes stared directly at Ethan without emotion. Ethan recognized him instantly, Commander Vale. A dangerous man from Ethan's military past, and judging by the smile slowly appearing across Vale's face, this hunt had just become personal. The abandoned transport station became completely silent the moment Commander Vale stepped out of the shadows. Weak emergency lights flickered above the rusted train tracks, while cold air moved slowly through the underground tunnels. Kyle immediately pulled his mother closer after seeing the armed soldiers standing behind Vale. Fear returned to the child's silver eyes stronger than before. Ethan slowly moved in front of them protectively while staring directly at the man from his past. The expression on Vale's face remained calm, but his cold gray eyes carried something dangerous hidden beneath them. "It's been a long time, Ethan," Vale said while walking forward slowly. "I honestly thought you were smarter than this." Several armed soldiers spread through the station behind him with pulse rifles ready. Red laser sights moved across the dark room while security drones hovered silently near the ceiling. Kyle's mother struggled to breathe beside the wall, and Ethan could already see they had no easy escape left. Vale stopped only a few feet away before looking toward Kale carefully. A strange smile slowly appeared on his scarred face as he studied the frightened child. "So this is Subject Zero," Vale whispered softly. Kale immediately froze after hearing those words. Ethan's expression hardened instantly. "He's not a subject," Ethan replied coldly. "He's a child." Vale gave a small laugh before shaking his head slowly. "You still pretend morality matters in this universe." He looked back toward Kale again while speaking calmly. "Do you even know what that boy really is? Do you understand what your little rescue mission could cost humanity?" Ethan stayed silent while keeping himself between the soldiers and the frightened family behind him. Deep inside, however, questions continued growing heavier inside his mind. What exactly had they done to Kale during those experiments? Vale finally looked back toward Ethan seriously. "Move aside," he ordered calmly. "This doesn't concern you anymore." But Ethan did not move. For several long seconds, the two men stared at each other while tension filled the station around them. Finally, Vale sighed heavily like a disappointed teacher speaking to an old student. "You always had a weakness for sympathy," he muttered quietly. "That's why you never belonged in military command." Kale looked nervously between them while helping his mother sit upright against the wall. The child clearly realized these men shared history together. Then Vale suddenly spoke words Ethan hoped never to hear again. "Tell them what happened on Seraph 9. Ethan froze completely. Old memories crashed into his mind instantly. Burning cities, smoke filling the sky, alien civilians running through destroyed streets while military ships blocked every escape route above the planet. Ethan's breathing slowly became heavier as guilt returned to him stronger than ever before. Kale noticed the change immediately. His silver eyes narrowed carefully while watching Ethan's face. "What is he talking about?" Kale whispered softly. Ethan lowered his eyes toward the floor for several painful seconds before finally speaking. "During the war, I worked transport missions for military operations." His voice sounded quieter now. Seraph 9 was one of those missions. Kale's mother suddenly looked up at Ethan in shock. "That colony," she whispered weakly. "That was our home." Silence filled the station. Cale slowly stood up while confusion and anger spread across his face. Ethan felt sick the moment he saw realization growing inside the child's eyes. "You were there?" Cale asked quietly. "When humans attacked us?" Ethan could not lie anymore. "Yes." The word felt heavy enough to crush the entire room. Kyle stepped backward slowly while staring at Ethan like he no longer recognized him. Betrayal filled the child's silver eyes. "You said you wanted to help us," he whispered shakily. "But you were one of them." Ethan immediately tried stepping closer, but Cale moved away again. The pain on the boy's face hurt more than any weapon ever could. "You don't understand," Ethan said desperately. "I didn't know what they were doing there." "But you still helped them," Cale replied. Those words cut deeply because they were true. Commander Vale smiled coldly while watching everything unfold. "Now you finally understand," he said toward Cale. "Humans destroy everything they touch. Your mother tried warning you about trusting them." Cale looked torn apart emotionally while his sick mother grabbed his arm weakly. "No," she whispered painfully. "Ethan is not like them." But before anyone could speak again, the station suddenly shook violently. A loud explosion echoed through the tunnels nearby. Everyone turned immediately toward the far entrance as smoke poured into the station. More soldiers rushed inside, shouting warnings, while emergency sirens screamed louder than before. Vale's expression changed instantly. "What happened?" he demanded angrily. One officer quickly ran toward him. "Unknown attackers breached Sector 9, the soldier reported nervously. "They're destroying security checkpoints." Then suddenly another explosion rocked the station. The lights above flickered violently while dust fell from the ceiling. In the confusion, Cale's mother suddenly grabbed Ethan's arm tightly. Her weak eyes looked directly into his with urgency and fear mixed together. "You must protect him," she whispered. Before Ethan could respond, she pushed a small glowing crystal into his hand. Strange alien symbols moved inside the object like flowing light trapped beneath glass. Ethan stared at it in confusion while Cale looked shocked beside him. "What is this?" Ethan asked quickly. "Proof," she whispered weakly. "Everything they did, every experiment, every child they destroyed." Vale's face instantly darkened after seeing the crystal. "Take it from them," he shouted furiously. Soldiers immediately raised their weapons, and in that terrifying moment, Kyle finally realized the truth. His mother had not escaped the laboratory carrying a weapon. She escaped carrying evidence powerful enough to destroy the entire human government.